The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to continue an important topic on the webinar today. From a few months back, we started to talk about improving pedestrian safety at uncontrolled crossing locations and the resources available from FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, through the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian program. So today what we're going to be doing is talking a lot more about uncontrolled crossing locations and specifically how we can gather really important data and information about those locations to begin to be able to plan and effectively make decisions about how we improve safety there. So we are going to hear some really valuable presentations today from agencies that are collecting and conducting these inventories of their crossing locations to understand how to link that back to locate areas that are in need of some safety improvements. So you might have been on our webinar a few months ago in January where we delivered a session about some new guidance available from the Federal Highway Administration developed as part of this Everyday Counts Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian program, or STEP. It really lays out a process for selecting countermeasures to improve crossing locations and safety there based on a variety of roadway characteristics, traffic volume, and other factors. Today we're going to kind of look at that very initial step of that process where you have to have that information at your fingertips and know all this valuable information about your crossing locations. We're going to talk a little bit in a moment about some of that information about the STEP guidance. If you missed that webinar, we'll give you a bit of a refresher on that information and then move into our presentations today, leaving plenty of time at the end for discussion so we can answer your questions. My name is Dan Jeline. I will be facilitating the webinar today, and I would like to introduce you to three of the panelists that are joining us today. I'll start with Lorraine Moyle. Lorraine is or has been with the Florida Department of Transportation for 6 years and has been the manager of the local programs office for the past 4 years, where she performs program administration and policy development for 7 federal and state-funded grant programs specific to local public agencies. She was recently nominated to serve as the steering committee lead for the new National Local Programs Peer Exchange sponsored by AASHTO. We're also joined by Carrie Shepard. Carrie is the Civil Rights Officer for the Federal Highway Administration's Florida Division Office. He provides oversight of and technical assistance to the Florida DOT in 8 program areas, including special outreach initiatives. He's worked for FHWA since 2008 and has over 20 years of experience in federal civil rights legal oversight, enforcement, and litigation. We're also joined by Tim Framo. Tim works as a transportation engineer for the Los Angeles Department of Transportation in a lead capacity on engineering solutions to improve safety as part of the city's Vision Zero initiative. Tim has worked for LADOT for 16 years in varying capacities associated with active transportation infrastructure, with an emphasis on expansion of the city's bicycle network and on localized transportation issues with one of LADOT's district offices in the Hollywood area. So we're grateful to have all of our panelists here today and eager to hear their perspectives on this important topic. But before we move forward, I do want to take just a bit of your time and talk through some housekeeping issues and questions that you may have as we move along. If you have any trouble with audio today, I'd encourage you to toggle between the audio options. You can either connect by phone or connect by computer audio through using your mic and speakers option. If one isn't working properly, sometimes using the other, toggling back and forth can help fix that problem. If you have any issues, technical difficulties with the webinar, simply closing out of the webinar and rejoining should be able to solve some of those problems. I'll be monitoring the question box. If you have questions, you can post them there, or comments that you'd like me to see. Hopefully we can get to those in a timely manner. If you have questions along the way, please submit them using that questions box. We're not going to be able to open all of the lines up today because we have quite a large crowd, but we'll be monitoring the questions and the comments as they come up. And that's what I'll be doing and using to pull from our, during our discussion question period, trying to pull some of those topics and questions and comments that are being raised. So at any point, please feel free to submit those. We are holding about 25 to 30 minutes or so at the end of the webinar for a discussion period. We have just posted a PDF copy of the slides from the presentation today. You can access those by going to pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. In a moment, I'll be sending around the direct link where you can access the PDF of the slides from today's presentation. So don't feel that you need to write everything down as we move through it. It is available for you online. We are also recording the session and hope to make that available to you within about a day on that same archive page. You can access that through pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. Later today, you're going to be receiving a follow-up email. That'll include a few things. One, it's going to include a link to the archive page and the slides that we mentioned. It's also going to give you a link to download a certificate of attendance for the webinar, showing your hours of instruction and all that. Hopefully you can use that to report on claiming PDHs or other continuing education requirements. It's important to know that if you're attending the webinar with a large group and you're the one who registered, you'll be getting that email later today. So please forward that to the others who are in the room with you to make sure that they can also see that information and get that certificate of attendance. We're also going to have a link, as I mentioned, where you can download the video and access the video recording for today's webinar. If you're not familiar with PBIC and some of the other webinars we offer, we do have several sessions coming up in the next few weeks, actually, that we're about to announce. So one of the best ways to stay up to date with us is either to bookmark our webinar page or follow us on social media, signing up for our newsletter. Those options are all here on the screen. We're going to be delivering some sessions in the coming weeks on how we measure multimodal network connectivity. We're going to have a whole session about bicycle signals and how to use those. We're also going to be talking about pedestrian and bicycle crash typing and how to use crash type data. So if you're interested in these sorts of topics, please sign up for our mailing list so you get alerted when we do schedule those upcoming sessions. Before we move on, I do want to take our first poll of the day. We're interested in finding out about how many people are out there. So if you can take a look at this question and just let us know how many people are attending from your site. It might be just you. It might be a handful of folks, 4 to 5, 6 to 7. We just want to get a better read on how people are attending our webinars and how many people are out there. So I'll leave this open for just a few more seconds so it doesn't take too much time. We can move right along with the rest of our presentations. While you're voting in that poll, I'll mention for those of you who are planners and you're used to claiming CM credits through AICP, we have submitted this webinar to be considered for 1.5 CM credits. So you can go to the APA event calendar there and search for this event. It should show up and you can claim your credits that way. Looks like almost everybody has voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close our poll now. Thank you all for providing that feedback to us. I want to give a bit of a recap about the webinar that we had back in January, on January 30th, which is available online if you want to access it and view the recording. But that was really an introduction to guidance that had been made available that month through the STEP program, Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian. And you may be wondering, what is STEP all about? So I want to provide a little bit of context for you there. We are focusing with STEP on how we can go about using various countermeasures and designs and signals and markings to improve safety for pedestrians at uncontrolled crossing locations. And so you see a list here of our 5 countermeasures that are already part of the STEP guidance. Visibility enhancements for crosswalks, raised crosswalks, refuge islands for pedestrians, pedestrian hybrid beacons, and road diets. These countermeasures are included in that round of guidance that's available online, which I'll show you a link to in a moment. But you might be wondering, and you might be aware of some of the more recent news and updates on the interim approval for the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. And I knew questions about this would come up. So what we wanted to make sure we did was provide you all with a link here on the screen to the latest information you need to know about the RRFB. It's not currently included in STEP guidance, but it is going to be added to the STEP guidance. Now that that interim approval is available, there's work underway to fold that really useful and effective countermeasure in with the rest of this guidance. So stay tuned for that. We'll be providing more information as that material makes its way into the STEP guidance. But beyond the countermeasures themselves, STEP is really geared around this 6-step process that is laid out in the field guide for how we select these countermeasures, following this 6-step process to really understand problems at uncontrolled crossings, what risks might be there, and how to figure out, using data, to figure out which of the countermeasures are most appropriate. And so you can see the 6-step process laid out here. There's much more detail available in the guidance that I'll send you a link to. But today, we're really covering a key step in this process, step 2, where we inventory conditions and prioritize locations. And the inventories that we collect are really key in this whole process. So it's really important to start out with that useful information at the outset. So we'll talk today about how we can get there. The STEP guidance really takes the next step, I guess, from the initial study that came out in 2005 on looking at the safety effects of marked versus unmarked crosswalks and laying out some recommendations for how you know when you need to do more than just paint a crosswalk on a street, when you need more reinforcement and more countermeasures and protection for pedestrians. So it really goes the next step and looks at, okay, what are the various factors that and which countermeasures are needed if certain conditions are met? How do you know what you need to put at a crosswalk? And that's really what's laid out in the STEP guidance. This is a picture of the guide here. So within that guidance, you'll find a series of tables that will help you understand, based on the number of lanes at a site, whether or not there's a median, what the traffic volumes are, what the speed limit is, how you can go about selecting the most appropriate countermeasures and designs for that particular location. So this is a guide that we stepped through in that last webinar, just using these tables in some real world scenarios to really figure out how to address these problems and move stepwise through that information. You can find that as well as this table in the guide, which kind of links together what safety issues we want to address and which of the countermeasures really addresses that issue head on, which of these countermeasures address vehicle speed or conspicuity and visibility or separation from traffic. And you can begin to think about how these various countermeasures can address those safety problems. And I'm going to leave this up for just a moment. These are some links to program staff at the Federal Highway Administration who can help answer questions and provide more detail about the STEP program. But the link in the middle of the page is a really good one to keep track of and have on hand. And in a moment, I'll send that out to you so you'll have it. You can open that and bookmark it. But it's a really good place to find all the STEP program information, guidance, field guides, the technical briefs for various countermeasures. Some really useful information there. But I mentioned this webinar we had a couple of months ago, and we asked a question during that session about which types of inventories the participants on that webinar have collected, their agencies had collected. They were able to pick among these various choices from curb ramps, pedestrian signals, sidewalks, uncontrolled locations, or none of them. Some people picked more than one, as you can probably see. Not everything adds up to 100. So, for example, we saw about 44% of people and agencies had collected inventories of their pedestrian signals. About half had also collected curb ramp and sidewalk information. But what caught our eye is the fact that only about 15% of the agencies on the line that day, or who responded to the poll, had actually collected uncontrolled crossing location inventories. And so that really made us think, well, we need to provide a little bit more information about how to do that. Maybe there's a reason why agencies haven't collected a lot of this information. And so that really set us up for the discussion today. So what we're going to hear about today is some programs that are happening in both Florida and Los Angeles, where they've done that important work and created these tools that can really help us better understand and inventory these locations, collect that valuable information that you need to really consider safety risk and know what to do next with our crossing locations. So with that, I'm going to turn things over first to Lorraine Moyle and Carrie Shepard, who are going to talk about what's going on in Florida. So Lorraine, if you can keep an eye on your screen, I'm going to send it over to you. And if you can take control whenever you're ready, I'll let you know when I can see your slides. Perfect. You're all set up and ready to go. I can't hear you, though, and if, you might be on mute.
You should be able to hear us.
Oh, there you
Can
are.
You hear us?
Okay. Thanks. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, my name is Carrie Shepard, and I work for the Florida Division for Federal Highway Administration. And as y'all know, I'm joined by Lorraine Moyle, who is the manager of our local public agency program, which we call LAP here in Florida. And we were able to also get the technical developer from Florida International University Lehman Center for Transportation Research, Dr. Fabian Ceballos, and he is logged in as me. So if you've got technical questions, Fabian's going to hang in there so that he can answer those questions about how we developed this. But we're going to talk about SAPFIM, the Safe Accessible Pedestrian Facilities Inventory Model. We tried to come up with the most complicated acronym that we could, and we figured SAPFIM was sufficiently confusing to let that to get that out there. But Safe Accessible Pedestrian Facilities Inventory Model, and it came about because in 2010 we began reviewing our subrecipients and for civil rights compliance, both in Title VI and ADA. And we looked at their programs and we looked at their projects, and we looked at their specifications. And while most of them either had or could easily develop the required civil rights requirements, most of them, and a vast majority of them, did not have transition plans, which are required for public agencies that have 50 or more employees. And that's under two legal authorities, 28 CFR 35.105, which covers self-evaluations of pedestrian facilities, and 28 CFR 35.150, which covers transition planning of those facilities. So we saw that as a risk, that we had a lot of folks out there that did not have transition plans and didn't know how to get started. And when we asked them what their challenges were, the response we got was that they would rather put money into the actual concrete of projects rather than in planning for projects. And so we decided that we needed to come up with something that was low cost, no cost, tech savvy, that would assist these subrecipient local agencies with complying with the law. As it happened, FIU and Florida Department of Transportation had already developed a similar system called ATSIM, which covered the accessibility and safety of transit stops. So using that idea, we were able, for a very small amount of money, through a stick grant and some funding put in by Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization and also FIU and FDOT, we were able to develop this system.
All right, so SAPM was developed with 3 objectives in mind. And really, the development was to provide, like Carrie said, state DOTs, local public agencies who are main target here, and their MPOs, and other transportation agencies, a low cost or no cost means of collecting the data and being able to provide the reporting feature for ADA transition planning. And we wanted to ensure that there was a means in the tool to identify and assess safety and accessibility together. So the features associated with sidewalks, curb ramps, and street crossings in your transportation rights of way at a minimum are available collection points in the system. And then to provide an easy and convenient method for collecting the data for direct upload to a web server. So it needed to be easy for anyone to collect that data and provide access to the local or the state DOT, et cetera.
This slide gives you a little idea of how we got it developed. We started with a lot of stakeholder input from our MPOs and our local agencies. Then we began meeting with with the technical sponsor, Florida International University, as well as local agencies, MPOs, and others. FIU was able to create a database and user interface. We put it out broadly for testing. Both here in Florida, also New York assisted us with testing, Arizona, and a number of MPOs and local agencies nationally. They provided their feedback, we did the final testing, and we're currently in the marketing phase. We are not tracking how many agencies are using SAPM at this time because we're actually beyond the funding cycle, but we've got it out there for use by local agencies at no cost, or depending what they want, low cost. And that's how we developed it.
And simply put, this is how SAPM works. So there's a database. Obviously, you're going to put your data somewhere, a web server that's got to host it, inputs and outputs here, and an internet connection. So you can connect over the internet by any smartphone, tablet, laptop in the field. Smartphones can tend to be a little small. We do recommend using a tablet or a laptop. It just seems to be, the visibility is a little better for the data points at about, what, 10 inches or above, Carrie?
That's about right. We tried with the cell phone, and some of the millennials that helped us test had no trouble at all using their smartphone. Lorraine and I, who are about a year older than millennials, were unable to make that work.
And then you can always go back and view the data at your desktop. You can even pull up the system at your desktop, but you'll see later on there's interactive mapping and photographing features. So for in the field data collection, you're going to want to use a tablet or a laptop or a smartphone, something portable for your means.
So it's really easy to log into SAPM, and you can log in right now if you would like to on your computer. The web address, which is up on your screen now, is http://sapm.fiu.edu, and you'll see that there's a username and a password. This is a test system. This test system has been up since 2017 and will remain up at least until the end of this year, 2018, and any agency can go in and begin using it. When you put in the username and password, you're going to get a very intuitive opening page. And it's only got 4 buttons: data collection, mapping, data management, and report. And if you look at the bottom of that screen, there will be 2 resources. One is a quick user guide, a quick reference guide, and the other is a user's guide. And most of the questions that folks can have about SAPFM that they're using it can be in one of those 2 resources, and that minimizes the need to contact anyone for technical support.
So the first feature that you saw on the previous slide is data collection. You collect the data in the field and you enter it into the prescribed fields on your tablet or laptop, smartphone, etc. And we'll look at those data points in a little more detail later on in the presentation, but that's your first step, is data collection, and it's fairly simple. The fields are easy to populate and there's drop downs.
We were very proud of the fields because the person collecting the data in the field doesn't have to be an expert. It takes very little training to use this and to follow the very intuitive system. We have not given the data collector the ability to say whether something is compliant or not compliant. So each of the fields are very easy, either yes or no, or there's a drop down, or there's a specific measurement, plus or minus that measurement, etc. It makes it very easy for groups school groups or interns or other folks that maybe don't work in transportation to participate as a community in transition planning.
So there are 42 data points for sidewalks, 23 for ramps, and 23 for crossings. Those data points come from a blending of the PROWAG, the 2010 ADA standards. Again, as we mentioned before, we vetted all of the data points that we initially implemented the system with through many technical experts, architects, ADA experts across the country. And so those data points, like Carrie said, are measurements, they're drop downs, they're yes or no questions, because that's really going to lead you to your reporting where decisions can be made.
Once again, the data collection, the folks that are doing the data collection are not experts. If you look up at the screen, you're going to see a picture of 2 handsome fellows, and those fellows are both urban planners. And they're urban planners with Broward MPO. They don't go out onto projects like many of us do. They are not well versed in construction specification or design. They're planners. Nevertheless, they're able to use SAPFM to take those measurements, to use the drop down, and that's why this tool is so good for MPOs that are looking to get their bike ped committees, or they're looking to get some folks into the field to really be part of something that can benefit the community. Faith-based organizations have used it. Also, summer interns have used it. Now, one of the things that Lorraine mentioned is that even though there are all these data points, there's no requirement that you use all the data points. Some might only want to be looking at sidewalk condition issues and are really only looking for a couple of data points. But what we've provided is everything that we believe would satisfy safety and accessibility for crossings and for sidewalks and for ramps. A lot of the feedback we received wanted more, and FIU is very, very happy to assist with that, but the free version, the Kia version, as we like to say, is what it is. Agencies that want to add bells or whistles to SAPFM or add data points can certainly work with the developer to do that for them.
So the second feature that you saw on the home screen, or you'll see on the home screen, is going to be the reporting feature. So reporting can be as little or as much as you want it to be in terms of the data that you collect. You can run compliance type reports where you isolate certain features that you want to narrow in on, like the height of your pedestrian, signals at your intersections, things like that. You can really tailor that reporting feature to anything that you would like to focus in as an agency. So those reports can be full, providing, sorry, we have people looking for something in the room. Those reports can also be snapshots of the full set of data that you collect. So if you need to focus in on everything, or you're wanting to post that data for public comment or review as part of your ADA transition planning satisfaction, then you can also do that.
Did you all open the ticket on that?
We're on a webinar. No.
Okay, somebody opened
Thanks.
the ticket on it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
That's plugged in. It's working now. We wouldn't have come in without you opening the ticket. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. Our OIT is helping during the webinar. So anyway, in the reporting feature, there's also a place where you can click on any icon and you can determine whether or not that icon, that data point, is in compliance.
The third button or feature is mapping. And mapping allows the agencies to print or save a map along with the collected data. Along with the reporting feature, clicking on a sidewalk, a ramp, or a crossing icon will display a corresponding map. Maps are important for another reason. It makes it very easy to determine prioritization. To be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, a transition plan has to be prioritized in terms of those features that are of most public importance. Therefore, it's easy to determine whether you're near a library or a city hall or a hospital or something where pedestrian features and upgrades should be prioritized over ones that may be a little less of importance to the public.
And this is just a zoom in on some of those data points that we've been talking about today. So in the case of crossings, there are questions like location. Is the crossing marked or not? Simply yes or no. Is there a 4x4 foot maneuvering area for a wheelchair for accessibility? Is it on the street, at the street grade? Is there a median, a refuge? Things like that. So you would enter that information, yes, no questions, like we said before, simple measurement. And you can collect all of that information that may be vital for you to make accessibility and safety decisions about future upgrades or projects at those locations within your jurisdiction.
And lastly, and probably one of the most important features of SAPFIM is data management, because it gives the agency the ability to search or export to a work program or to a maintenance program or to a capital improvements program and actually post it on the website for public view and comment. Public inspection is one of the major things that agencies miss nationwide when they're developing ADA transition plans. They will develop them thinking that they've done a great job, but never think about vetting it with the public that's actually using them. And when you talk to Centers for Independent Living or for other representatives with those with disabilities, they may have a very different idea of what the priorities are. And this gives them the ability to look at that and say, you know, number 4 isn't good enough, we need to move it up to number 1 or move it down. And it gets that public involvement aspect of it.
So it's important to note we are not selling SAPFIM. SAPFIM was developed through a federal highway stick grant along with matches from DOT or Broward MPO, like we said before. And it is free to any agency that would like to use it. Like we showed you, there's a demo username and password. You can create a username and password.
So Lorraine's the good cop who tells you that it's free, and I'm the bad cop that comes in that says, but hosting data does come with a cost. So even if you're hosting it on your own internal servers, there's going to be a cost for staffing and there's a cost for use of those internal servers. However, agencies can sign a Microsoft licensing agreement through FIU and begin using it today for themselves without any cost at all. Agencies are also welcome to contract with the Florida International University for a nominal annual fee, or you might want to use your own University Transportation Center or a private consultant. So the sky's the limit. For those that are interested in using SAPFIM, you could use a Kia model for free today, or you can upgrade it to a Cadillac for spending a little extra money.
So if your agency does not have a transition plan or any immediate prospects of one, we really urge you to test the system, see how user-friendly it is, if you like it, if what we're telling you is actually true on the line today, and you can always call and provide comments to us. If you like what you see, you can contact Dr. Fabian Ceballos at FAU to discuss using SAPFIM and the server requirements. He would really be your expert there. So FAU can assist you with downloading any of the necessary materials. For those of you who want to self-host, they'll help you with the licensing agreement, things like that. And then we have a number of SAPFIM champions that you can contact with questions.
So for technical, as Lorraine said, for technical concerns or questions, please contact Fabian at FIU. If you're a state or and you've got questions about maybe ADA compliance or using a system like this, you can contact Lorraine or me, and we'd be happy to help you. If you're an MPO, we have a rep that just handles MPOs. His name is Peter, and he's from the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization, and you're free to contact him as well.
And if you're a local agency, you can always contact Lorraine or Carrie as well. And we just want to say thank you. There were many people, like we said, who tested and participated in the feedback on the system. You can see some of those partners on the screen here.
We dragged them all to Miami, and it was like the one week it was 100 degrees and there wasn't a whiff of air. And we lost our Arizona people and we lost all our northern people. They had to all go sit down. But later they said how great SAPFM was.
So.
Awesome.
And that is the end of our presentation.
That's great. Thank you both so much. That was a really nice look at the tool you all have developed. And I wanted to see, I usually am going to keep most of the questions until we have a discussion period later, but some of them actually would be more useful to answer maybe while we still have the screen over with you guys. And my first request is a few people wanted to see if you could flip back to that screen that you had up on the cost, the hosting cost and the things that go into the various options for servers and maybe the options to host it locally. Lorraine, I don't know if you're able to flip backwards to, it was the slide after the marked down slide.
Okay.
You can flip to that because I've got just a few other questions more about what comes out of this tool. People are wondering about the formats of if you have things loaded in terms of locations and inventories in there, are you able to pull data out in sort of a GIS spatial format? And if so, can you say anything more about what the format of that data is? That point data, line data, anything more about how it might look when it comes out of the tool?
And this is why we wanted to have Fabian on the line, because he can answer the more technical aspects of SAPFM. Fabian, do we still have you?
Yes, great question. The data actually can be exported in three forms. We have a CSV file, which is a text file that can be exported and opened in Excel. It can be exported as a GIS point file, and all the pictures taken for the pedestrian sidewalks, ramps, or crossings can also be exported.
Okay.
Those are the three export formats that we have in this software.
That answers that question. Thank you very much. That one came up a few times, so I wanted to go ahead and get an answer out there. I think the rest of it we can fold into the main discussion toward the end. So those were the two main things I wanted to hit. But what we can do now.
I think there's just one quick point to add to that, and
sure.
And that's what we've given you the ability in SAPFM to determine compliance based on the 2010 standards. And also PROAG if your agency is a little more sophisticated and has moved to the public right-of-way guidelines. So once that comes out, the user isn't actually making the determination of compliance. It's the system that then will say this particular crossing is in compliance or is not in compliance with PROAG or the 2010 standards.
Great. Okay. Well, that's really helpful. Thank you both so much. Thanks all three of you for sharing that information. We'll come back to you during the discussion. What I'm going to do now is I'll turn things over to Tim Framo in LA. So Tim, keep an eye on your screen. When you get the alert comes across, you should be able to display your slides, and I'll let you know when we see those.
Okay, great. Are you able to see them yet?
I don't see them yet. We're just waiting to display. There may be a button that says show my screen. Did you click that one already?
Where would I find that?
Let me try one more time. Here we go. See if that comes across your screen.
I'm not getting anything on my end here.
Okay, sorry about that, Tim. We'll troubleshoot this real quick, and if let's see. Let me try it one more time, Tim. Send it over to you. If that doesn't work, I may need to pull your slides up on my end.
Okay.
All right. Tim, if that doesn't work, I've actually got your slides up over here. We can go a little ways into it with just showing on my end what I have.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see anything. The only thing I see is the screen that says Tools to Inventory Crossing Infrastructure, and it says Waiting to View the UNC Highway Safety Research Center screen.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just try mine for now, at least, and we can at least get into it.
Okay, I see yours.
And you see your slides on my screen?
I do.
Okay, great. Yeah, maybe we can get started with this, and then we'll see in a moment if we can't get you to, because I know you were going to show a little bit of the insides of your inventory, so we'll hopefully be able to make that work.
Yeah, we can make it work. All right. Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. I'm here to build off of that previous presentation from the folks from Florida to talk about the City of LA's uncontrolled crosswalk inventory, and I'll talk a little bit about the genesis of it, how it came about, some of the features, some of the characteristics of the inventory itself, and then some of the ways that we use it to essentially prioritize and look for improvement opportunities.
Great. Get into it here.
All right. So the first question is, I guess, why is it important to have an inventory of uncontrolled crosswalks? And you know, for us, we've been really trying to just manage our assets in general, all the assets that we use, that we you know, maintain and operate in the City of LA in terms of transportation infrastructure, like parking meters, curb zones, traffic signals. And as part of that, uncontrolled crosswalks were definitely on our radar. We have a large number of them, almost 700 uncontrolled marked crosswalks in the City of LA. We have the largest street network in the United States, so it's going to have accordingly a large number of assets. And so that's important for us to just understand what's out there, what we have, what are the conditions associated with those assets, and track sort of, you know, when we're upgrading and when we're providing new elements to that inventory. You know, for us, it's also a way for us to catalog all the different various features of those crosswalks. So when we get into the tool, I'll talk about some of those features, but some of that is based on the location of the assets and their characteristics. And then what it does is it allows you to use that listing, that inventory, to then sort and query by various features in order to find specific candidate locations. If I had the inventory open, I'd be able to show that to you in real time, but I'll still be able to sort of describe the way that works with some of the screenshots. And so, you know, building off of that one, the next step is really using the inventory to then find opportunities to prioritize and find candidates for upgrade or you know, modification. As was mentioned in the previous, you know, the original introduction to the presentation, there's been a highlighted effort all over the country to really look at ways to improve the conditions around uncontrolled crosswalks through the STEP program, and this is a tool that allows us to look at our vast assets and come up with a strategy to prioritize upgrading them. Next slide. All right, so some of the important features and conditions, and you'll see some of these in the actual tool, but just a kind of an overview of the types of characteristics that we are cataloging. The basic information about where the crosswalks are, their geography, the neighborhoods, the streets, the intersections, and then some of the features of the roadway, the types of intersections, whether it's a T or a jog or a mid-block, the type of roadway, is it an arterial, is it a collector, is it a local street, what's the posted speed limit, and other things like that. And then what are some of the features of the actual crosswalk itself? What color is it? Is it yellow or white? Is it continental? Is it ladder, transverse only? Are those supplemental signs in place? Are there pedestrian activated beacons? And then collision history, maybe one of the, if not the most important feature. When we keep that updated with the latest 5 years of data available, and we look at both overall crashes and we look at specifically serious bicycle and pedestrian crashes. And that will really help us prioritize locations when we have a large number of them. We need some sort of tiebreaker. And then, you know, it's important to catalog when you have added features. Where are those? What type of features are they? Are they RRFBs? Are they some sort of other flashing beacons? Are they refuge islands? Are they hawks? And then when you're looking for opportunities to add those kind of features, identifying them in the inventory is actually a way to memorialize an effort that you may have used to look at that using the tool. So let's take a look at the tool. I know this will be just through the use of screenshots, but I'll kind of walk through some of the columns and information in there. I don't know, Dan, if you can bring that up.
And Tim, I opened the Google Doc that you sent me a link to a while back. I wonder if I can actually pull that over and show that from my
end, sure.
Because you're in there. So let's try this and just see. You should be able to see it now. It's not going to be super clean, but it gives you a sense of like what you're talking about. This is the inside of your inventory in a way.
That'll work. Can you maybe go full screen on it?
Let me try that.
All right. Just try F11.
Yep, there it is. Okay.
Great. All right. So we're going to work kind of from left to right, and I'll describe some of the various features that are cataloged in here. So on the left, we start with the basic information, the primary street that the crosswalk is on, the cross street, and then we have the intersection ID and street view. So the ID is really something we use for GIS cataloging, but Dan, if you can click on any one of those links, it'll bring up an image of the crosswalk in Google Street View. And that's just a quick and easy way without having to go manually and entering the cross street data. You can pull up any location in your catalog, and you know, those are generally relatively updated. So it's a good way to get a quick snapshot without necessarily having to go out to the field for some basic information.
Right.
And you can go back when you're ready. All right, and then some of the information here in LA, we have council districts. The city is divided into 15 council districts. And I should preclude by saying that a lot of this information is readily available in other databases that we have or mapping resources. Some of it does require the use of either going out to the field or, you know, Street View is a way to start with at least cataloging some information. With 700 locations, it's definitely tedious to add everything. So this has been a work in progress over a long period of time, and it's a living document. Then we have some features like our high injury network for Vision Zero. So it is a location on the high injury network. Skipping ahead a little bit, there's the functional classification of the roadway. In LA, we have a lot of peak hour lanes, so lanes that are only active during rush hour periods. So we kind of separate the number of lanes, whether they be 24-hour active or peak hour, and then the total number of approach lanes. And I'll talk later about why that's important when looking for priority locations. And then you have street width. Now, this is an example where you can see that there are a lot of blank entries. One of the things we do often is we add a new column with some information that we're specifically looking for a specific purpose. And oftentimes, we're only looking for that for some specific subset of locations. So when we do that, we fill in only what we need to, and eventually we'd like to see it all obviously filled in, but you know, it's basically, and we add as needed information when it's relevant. Again, moving to the right, we have the type of pavement. If concrete versus asphalt is something that you want to be considerate of for maintenance for us, that's something we are mindful of. Concrete tends to, the thermoplastic wears faster. The type of intersection, the distance between traffic signals, the upstream and downstream, and I'll talk later about why we use that. The average daily traffic, another important feature, which I'll talk about later, and as well as the speed limit, the posted speed limit of the street. More basic information, the color of the crosswalk, the style of the crosswalk. Here in LA, our standard is to add the shark teeth and yield here to pedestrian signs that are on the curb, and then we have looked at locations and we have added the in-road mounted yield here to pedestrian signs, and that's what we call our paddle signs. So we have cataloged that as well. Moving to the right, if you can maybe scroll a little bit to the right, Dan, and show some of the other rows, or columns rather. The middle here, which looks kind of blank, but if you scroll down, Dan, a little bit, we can see some that are more filled in. This is really where we catalog the pedestrian activated beacons that we are very aggressively trying to implement citywide. And you'll see where there are existing beacons, when they were implemented. This is still a work in progress. We're trying to add some of the more detailed information like the manufacturer, the duration of the flash rate. And then where we have funding like HSIP or other sources of funding that we're using where we've already essentially guaranteed that going in, we identify that here so that when we're querying for new locations, we're avoiding locations that have already been authorized and funded for new devices. And then moving to the right, there's some more features that are pretty basic, such as left turn channelization and striping with the presence of a median. We have a program to add refuge islands, and we have only a few of those, but we do catalog them here. And then the crash data is really really one of the foundational elements. So as I mentioned, we update that with the latest 5 years of data that we have available. We'll soon be updating this to 2017, up to 2017. So the next column I'm going to talk more in detail about. This is the Z-Gear rating. This is what we call that. It's based on the chart in the STEP guide, and it's based on the Charles Z-Gear study that laid the foundation for when it's appropriate and when it's really necessary to add important features to make the crosswalk, as Dan talked about in the beginning of the presentation, when it's important to not just mark the crosswalk. And this is something in LA where over the last several decades, we were pretty liberal in approving marked crosswalks, and we did so with few additional features oftentimes. And so we're having to go back and try to retrofit a lot of locations. And we're using this as a way to do that. So in order to get that Z-Gear rating, which we call it, it's just a number. It's either going to be essentially a nothing, a 0, a dash, or an A 1, or a 2. We consider a 1 to be a location that really needs to have supplemental devices. And for us, it really is centered around the activated flashing beacon or hybrid beacon, which we haven't done yet, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So for us, primarily, it's been that flashing activated beacon. And so if we have a 1, that's a location that we want to prioritize just right off the get-go for needing it, because it has a combination of, based on that Z-Gear chart, approach number of lanes, posted speed limit, and average daily traffic, and median, presence of median or lack thereof, that indicates that it needs to have something more. A 2 is sort of in the middle. It's kind of a optional, and if it's something else, a dash or an NA, it either doesn't need it or it's going to get it already. It's already funded. And so what I was going to do was show you, but I can just describe it because Google Sheets is very easy to use. It's just like at Microsoft Excel. Mm-hmm. What you can do essentially is you can filter and sort. So using the filter tool, you can start by saying, okay, I only want to look at locations that have a 1. I'm looking for candidate locations. I'm going to apply in the next HSIP cycle. And so you could do that. You could sort by the 1s. And then once you do that, you could then filter, or excuse me, you could sort by the PED-BIKE KSI. That's the column next to it. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying, I'm only looking at locations that are really already indicated that they need to have something more than just a marked crosswalk. And now I'm going to look at, because I still have a large universe of locations, where are the worst performing locations in terms of collisions, and in doing so, I can then prioritize the locations with the most need. So I think Dan is trying to do that, but it's really very simple and easy with Google Sheets. I will mention, as Dan's doing that, Google Sheets is a shared document, so it has a lot of advantages. It's a living document that can be updated and viewed by all the people that you want to have it viewed by. But I would caution you to limit the amount of editing privileges that you give folks in your organization, because we've struggled with this a little bit. And you want people to update it when they make changes, but then ultimately they may make mistakes or mess things up. So I would recommend that you have a limited number of people who actually edit the document, but that you make it stress that it's important for folks in your organization to provide the information to those folks so they can keep this document as up to date as possible. Mm-hmm. Another example of a way that you can use this tool to query is, as I touched on, we're starting to get our feet wet with the pedestrian hybrid beacon. We haven't yet implemented any in LA, although there are a couple that Caltrans implemented on state highways. We're starting to look at locations where we might want to consider them. And so one way to do that for us, we're trying to prioritize a couple features. One is approach speed. So if we have 40 miles per hour posted speed or above, you can filter by that. For us, then we're filtering by multi-lane approaches. That's an easy other additional filter. And then we're also starting with mid-blocks and T-intersections. I know there's still a bit of consternation by folks, including myself, as to how do you handle a four-legged intersection with a hybrid beacon. And I know it can be done, but I think we want to start with places that are not, just to kind of, you know, start with something a little simpler on our end, and we'll most likely end up moving into four-legged intersections. But so using those three ways of filtering, you can ultimately come up with what we've come up with, which is a small subset. It's on the order of 10 or 15 locations citywide that are good hawk candidate locations, and we're looking at places where we might want to convert our RFB, and other places where we want to just look at something that has a location that has nothing. There are some that are equestrian crossings. In parts of LA, we have an equestrian community that uses some of these marked crosswalks, and some of those are very high-speed roadways in rural parts of the city in the outlying areas. So that's important for us. Another thing we looked at, and I kind of touched on it, maybe Dan, you can scroll to the right, there's that column that says distance to upstream, downstream signalized intersection. Here in LA, we specifically look for locations when we are authorizing or we already have a flashing beacon at a crosswalk. If it's too close to both an upstream and downstream signal, and for us that's 600 feet, we don't want to provide a device that provides an unpredictable stoppage and interruption in traffic flow. And so in order to coordinate the nearby signals with that crossing, we actually will warrant a traffic signal in some of those cases. So in order to look for candidates for that feature, what we did was, this was a manual effort. We had to go into, just using Google, you can do this. We looked at each location and measured the distance between the upstream and downstream traffic signal. And then essentially, we only did that for locations that were going to be candidates for us to consider this. And doing that, Dan, if you can scroll down quite a ways until you get to sort of a neon green row. There's one there at 7th and Coronado. There's quite a few. There's another one right there, Beverly and Fuller. So these are locations where the distance to upstream and downstream signals is pretty small, and where I've flagged it with the green saying that this is a location we may want to consider warranting a traffic signal in the future. And that allows you to be aware when you're querying for other features. If it's something that's going to potentially meet the warrant of a traffic signal, maybe you avoid it for other devices, or you consider it as more of an interim measure. That's just one example of how sometimes with manual information entering, you can essentially flag locations and say, for some reason you want to either avoid it, or you want to say this is going to get a signal, so I'm going to do the dark green. It's already funded for a new signal. I'm going to avoid it for other querying purposes. And now I'm going to talk just about, in kind of closing, how the document can be adapted for new needs that you find. So one of the things we're looking at, this is an example of where we don't have the information yet in here, but we want to consider adding it. I'd mentioned earlier that we have been adding those in-road yield to pedestrian signs, which we call paddle signs. We started with locations that are multi-lane with only a double yellow in the center of the roadway. We felt that those locations essentially have no refuge and are difficult for pedestrians to negotiate. And for drivers, we really want to bring the extra awareness to them of the presence of the crosswalk itself. And that's what that sign really does. And so what we did was, at those locations, we identified them with this tool. I queried basically based on double yellow center line, no left turn channelization, multi-lane approaches. And I ended up with 100 and some odd locations. And then we essentially had those modified to create a small 2-foot separation in the center of the roadway. So we narrowed those lanes, and it may be difficult to find. Maybe Dan, if you can find, you might have to do a find for this, Hill and 14th Street. So if you maybe just search 14th Street or Hill Street using the Control F feature, you should be able to actually bring up the Google Street View, and I can show you what that looks like. Actually, yeah, Hill and 14th should come up if you go to the next one.
Sorry, everybody. Tim is working.
In the upper right, you can,
Tim's working with a novice over here.
In the upper right, you can use that. There should be only about 11 of them. There it is. Perfect. So I just want to show you what this looks like for us. So essentially, as I mentioned, we created that little separation in the center. It's like a mini refuge, and it gave us the space to put in the R1-6 sign with at least the hope that it will last a little bit longer with the separation. We also add, and it's not shown in this picture, but we add double white approach lane line, and we add reflective pavement markers at the crosswalk. We only started with locations with multi-lane and no center left turn lane, but we've been sort of wrestling with how to do it when you have that left turn channelization. And so what we want to look at now is basically locations that have the center left turn lane, but we want to make sure they're at least 10 feet wide, because we would be essentially narrowing them to 9 feet. What we're looking at doing is putting that sign on the barrier line between the left turn pocket and the number 1 lane. And we want to do is actually create that similar little V separation on the barrier line. So we want to make sure we have a 10-foot center lane. We have a center left turn lane, of course. We have a reasonably long left turn pocket, so we can actually implement a small taper. And that basically, once we do that, we come up with candidate locations. And we came up with about 10 in the general vicinity of the city center, because our office is based downtown. And we're going to start with that as a pilot and see how those kind of work and last, and how the yield compliance is. And we'll be able to observe them because they're relatively close to where we are. We'll start there and we'll expand it. So it's an example of how this tool can be adapted as you find additional ways to, or additional features that you want to look for. You can add that information as you go. And that's why it's continually growing into what it is now, which is quite large, and it will continue to grow as a document for that purpose. And that's it for me.
Great. Thanks, Tim, and thanks for rolling with some of the technical issues that we had there. I appreciate that. And we did make all of Tim's slides available on our website, so that archive. So I sent that link out a little bit later. If you want to peruse back through this, Tim, I can already predict one question, and that is, can I see a copy of your inventory? And so I wonder, I don't know if you've been able to screen cap any of it, or maybe even clip out a piece of it that we'd be able to share with some folks. But I know that you'll get some requests to maybe see it and tinker around with it, because it's very cool. So if you maybe think about how you'd want to respond to something like that, understanding that you, like you said, you don't want everybody in the world tapping into your data and messing with it or anything like that. So, but I know that people might be interested in getting their hands on some of this.
Yeah, I think I sent you some screenshots, and if you have those, you can share those, with the presentation. And then if folks contact me directly, and I have my email at the last slide of my PowerPoint, I can provide them with a view-only link if they're interested in actually seeing more of it.
Great, excellent. All right, well, we are going to get into, if I can figure out my screen, what I'm going to do now is transition us into our discussion period, because we've got a lot of good presentations happening, and I want to get to some of the questions that have been coming in. However, one thing I want to do, now that we've finished up, you've seen a lot of good examples of how these inventories can be done and maybe what they look like. I have a poll question here to just ask you all about some of the things that you might need to really move ahead and collect one of these inventories yourselves. And the poll is going to ask you to maybe speculate about, okay, which of the following things would be most useful to you in developing that inventory? Some of the things we're looking at. Is it getting better access to digitized roadway data? Is it training or maybe guidance on, okay, how do I best collect and document this stuff? Is it funding? I mean, we heard a few examples of how expensive this can be. I mean, this is a big undertaking, and some agencies, I think as Carrie said, may be more interested in spending that money on projects and concrete and pavement and infrastructure than actually the time and energy to spend on the collection of the inventory. Maybe it's just a capacity issue. You just need more staff to be able to do this stuff. Or maybe it's something else. Let us know what it is. I thought this would be an interesting way to kind of lead into some of the discussion period that we want to have here. So if wait just a moment, I'll show you the results when they're finished. Okay. Just one more minute on the poll. Let's get a few more votes in there, and then I'll close it and show it to everybody. Just a reminder, one of the questions that kept coming in as we went on was whether or not you all would have access to the slides from the presentation today. We did post them as a PDF on that website that we have up, pedbikeinfo.org/webinars will get you there. So if you want to look back at some of this material that Tim prepared and that Carrie and Lorraine prepared, you can look there. Tim, one question I want to go ahead and get into as people are finishing up the poll is one about you talked about a few factors that you're using to pick locations for controlled crossing treatments. Do you have a minimum volume, traffic volume that you use to kind of think, okay, below any such traffic volume or ADT, I'm really not gonna do a whole lot at my uncontrolled locations. I mean, we kind of know what's in the step guidance, but I wonder if you all have a rule of thumb below a certain volume, you're really not going to be prioritizing some treatments on those roads.
Well, I would say in terms of, for us, in terms of markings and signs, we feel pretty strongly that just every location, it's such a low cost and simple change that we want to really saturate all our locations with all the best signs and markings that we can come up with. And so we don't use it for that purpose. But when it comes to any sort of real hardware, like a flashing beacon or a refuge island or something like that, we do tend to defer to the step guidance, and I think there's a couple cutoffs in there, but that's part of the equation. I mean, the ADT goes into the equation, but it's not just that. It's also the speed and the number of lanes and all those things, because ultimately we have roadways that are, some of them are lightly traveled. They're in kind of the far-flung parts of town, but they're 45 miles per hour and they have 2 lanes in each direction. So for something like that, it still needs to be prioritized because of other reasons, not just the volume of traffic. So it's just one element in the equation.
So on the other side of the equation, just to follow on that, I think I may have even misinterpreted the question. I'm reading it again that somebody sent me. The question, I guess, is about whether or not you all, in combination with the ADT values, do you use pedestrian crossings, number of crossings within a given time to determine a threshold for a treatment? So say you count and you have below 20 or above 100 or above some other number. Do you have a sort of back of the envelope number of crossings that you use to determine when you're going to be making another step in toward a certain countermeasure?
That's a good question. So for us, that really it relates more to whether the crosswalk should be marked at all. Our guidelines over the years have always kind of included an element of a minimum pedestrian volume, and even if it's induced, it needs to be documented. So we typically would only authorize a new crosswalk if we saw a need or a desire line or something, that we could use it to justify the need for saying that's a place we want to encourage a crossing. In terms of existing crosswalks, I don't think we would use the crossing volume to necessarily relate to the features that we would want to add to it, but we would use that if we wanted to consider retention of the crosswalk at all. Some of these were put in decades ago, and it's very possible that things have changed, land use and other travel patterns have changed to the point where that crosswalk's no longer needed. Maybe it was only put in for a bus stop that has been relocated. So it's definitely a relevant feature when considering whether the crosswalk should be marked at all. But for us, there's less of an emphasis on that when it comes to the features that need to be included in the crosswalk's design.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Tim. And we've got enough votes now in our poll that I'm able to share the results. So keep an eye on your screen. They should come up. So we asked you all to say, okay, which of these things is going to be the most useful if you're thinking about developing an uncontrolled crossing inventory. The winner was, I guess, 33% of everybody out there said funding. So funding to just support the development and the collection of this information. And I think that's probably not a huge surprise. I mean, it gets at some of these other issues about getting staff time and other resources and training to do this. But at the end of the day, funding to support it. I mean, when funding is limited and it can go to other places, I think that's not surprising to me. And then almost a tie between folks looking for maybe training on how to best do this and collect and document the information, and then more staff time to get it done. The final choice was better digitized roadway data. A few people offered some other thoughts as well. But this gets back, I want to shift things to Carrie and Lorraine and your group over there. I mean, you mentioned right at the outset, Carrie, I think that funding to support the development of inventories, maybe I'm trying to interpret what you said, that might be one of the big reasons why you all went to this level to develop this tool, is that maybe cuts away that need to fund the development of some resource. Well, you've already got the resource that you built, and was that a big reason why you all initially developed the tool that you all have?
That's very well said. If y'all have been around a while, you'll remember a time to where to get federal funds, your recipient or subrecipient had to be able to assert compliance, and that included with all of the civil rights requirements. And we weren't giving out money for civil rights improvements. We were giving out money for all sorts of other improvements, but not for civil rights. It's only been in recent years we've actually allowed some of this funding to be used for accessibility under the ADA. So we backed off a lot, but that was our main purpose, was to get a tool out there for low cost, no cost for collecting that data. And trying to stay kind of under the umbrella of safety and accessibility, rather than coming right out and saying, hey, you know, we're trying to get you to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I can tell you right now that the argument's a lot harder when you say funding for ADA compliance than it is safety and accessibility.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so I wonder, based on that, kind of cutting out the funding piece, okay, the system is already available, the resources there, the software exists. What do you hear agencies that you're maybe trying to work with to develop these inventories? What's the next reason why it's hard to do these? Is it the staff time, but literally the time for people to get out there and do it? Is it needing an additional helping hand to help train and get people to understand what goes into an inventory? What are you hearing in Florida after you've rolled this out?
Yep, you've got it. It's right there. I can hand you an absolutely free tool, but someone has to go out there and actually implement the tool and use it, and that's tough. And that's why we've really tried hard to sell SAPFIM as a community tool, as an area where you can get different types of folks involved. It doesn't have to be your inspection staff. It doesn't have to be your maintenance staff. They're already overworked. So we're really trying to get our MPOs involved and the various citizens committees to get out there and enjoy themselves, but also provide something for the community. But that is the number one stumbling block, is actually getting the folks out there to collect the data.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to see if we can get back to some of the more technical questions that came up earlier. We still got a few of those coming in, so I wanted to see if we could revisit some of the questions about the data output. We've still got staff on to help us do that. And the question is whether or not that GIS or that data output from the database can be easily incorporated within maybe somebody's existing GIS data. So if I've already got maybe I have my crash data in a GIS format, I've got a base map that I'm using, can I pretty easily, with the export function of the GIS data from the tool, am I able to pull out something that I could easily integrate within my other GIS data sets?
I'll let Fabian answer that for sure, but you know, GIS is based on layers, and you can import and export files into and out of GIS very easily, and you just populate the layer that you want to transpose on top. We were actually talking about that a few minutes ago. We would not use AADT as a criteria in order to determine whether an improvement is needed or as part of this tool, but we could actually, the DOT maps that in GIS across the state, so we could actually merge that AADT layer with the SAPFIM layer data points and create a tool if somebody wanted to view the data that way. Mm-hmm. Fabian, do you have anything else?
Yes, basically, this is just a GIS shapefile that you can export from SAPFIM, and you can combine, like you said, with any other GIS layer. So this is a simple step.
Okay, very good. So that kind of answers, we had another couple of questions about whether the export from GIS is point-based or line-based, and is that, leading into your answer, is it line-based then?
No, this is a point-based shapefile that will be exported from SAPFIM.
Okay, I see. All right, that helps answer that question. Thank you very much. And a few more questions about what again were those usernames and passwords if people wanted to get in and use the tool. Could you remind us what those are?
Yeah, sure. It's in the PowerPoint, but it's fiu.edu.sapfim, and the password or the username is demo, D-E-M-O, and the password is SAPFIM, capital S-A-P-F-I-M.
Okay.
I don't know what page that's on, but it's pretty early in the presentation.
Okay, yeah, and folks, again, for those slides, if you want to access those, it's pedbikeinfo.org/webinars is where you can find that information. And again, that link and the username and password are sort of right in there. for you?
If you have trouble, just go to Google and put in SAPFIM, and you'll be able to get it that way. And we encourage you, get in there and break it. Try to break it. Try to find things that you like about it. You'll be sharing data with everyone else who's used the test system, but we really encourage you to see what you like, what you don't like, and if it might be something useful for you.
Yeah, great, thank you very much. And so that's one of my next questions, I guess, for you all is the you've rolled this out, if people are using it, what are you hearing from, we already asked if you're hearing about what's holding people up from using it, maybe it's staff time to actually get out and do it, but are you kind of collecting some feedback from end users and asking and getting information that you could maybe build in and improve the system in a way, or maybe generally what are you hearing from the users of the system?
Well, I don't think anyone wants to hear about the tedium of trying to get additional money to do marketing and tracking, but we've been told no on additional funds. So a lot of that material would have occurred during this year and next year if we were able to get the additional money. One of the things we heard early on is, and I think I mentioned, is they wanted more, or they wanted, they might want a data point that's different. And in most cases, all of that's doable, but actually changing the data sets would require additional money. We've got at least one agency that's using it to comply with the ADA, and that really helps us. When we have an agency in Florida that tells us that we want to be a local agency and a subrecipient of VEPDOT, and they're using the tool, we presume substantial compliance with the ADA simply based on using the tool. Now, that doesn't mean, and don't go say, Carrie said, if I use SAPFIM, I'm in compliance, because I'll deny it. What I am saying is that if our subrecipients in Florida use it, we take that as a best practice and a likely compliance with the ADA.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Tim, I wanted to kick things back over to you and ask a question. We saw sort of the inner workings of the inventory that you all keep, and you mentioned that you kind of limit access to it to make sure that not everybody's going in there and changing things all the time. You want to keep it fairly consistent, but to what degree or how regularly do you update that system? And it seems like it's really set up for very quick updates. As soon as something changes or an improvement is done, it seems like you can get that really right in there and reflect that change immediately, so you can make better decisions right off the bat. You don't have to wait any lag time. That's my perspective anyway. Is that pretty much the case?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we do some kind of like massive update at a regular interval. It's more like as we find out information, we will input that, or when we're doing a specific exercise that we need to input more features or more characteristics, then we'll do that at the time. With the exception of the collision data, that's one thing that when we do get an additional year of available data, we'll just do a global update of all the collision data, and having the GIS intersection IDs helps us do that very quickly. So aside from that, though, we'll update when we find out that something's been updated, and that's not an exact science with an organization as large as ours. That's something we need to work on to make better. I was just driving around the other day, and I noticed one of these had been converted to an all-way stop. So, that's not the best way to do it, but sometimes you just find out about something and then you update it accordingly. But that's something we want to improve on.
And just generally, how long did it take you all to pull that together? Like, when did the database start? You may have mentioned this early, and I couldn't remember the answer.
It's hard to say exactly when it started before me, but it wasn't in this format. It was, I think, just in an Excel format based on a GIS file. So it's been a couple of years that it's been operational, but a lot of the information was populated in the early months of its being sort of in place, and then things kind of got added on a slower basis. But given the size of it with 690 entries, it's pretty large database, and it definitely takes time to add all that information from the starting point. But once you have it, it's a lot easier to update it and to keep it maintained. It's really that first part that's the labor-intensive effort.
And remind me, not looking at the inventory right now up the bat, or right on my screen, the types of locations that you're able to flag or include, whether or not the crosswalk is maybe near a school or near a transit stop or another major generator. Is that information that you capture in the inventory, so you can quickly say, okay, I'm looking for just my school crossings or my transit crossings, things like that?
Yeah, that's something we kind of capture. I mean, the way that we do that for schools is if it's yellow, basically, it's going to be near a school. Now, if you wanted to do a geographical query, like let's say, is it 1,000 feet from a school, we could do that. It would just take us a step for us to then do it through GIS. We would essentially have our school map, we have our map of locations, and we would just do a query of locations that are within a certain radial distance from schools, for example. But so as I mentioned earlier, you can adapt it relatively easily, especially with the power of GIS for those kind of things. And then in the land use column, we have just some basic information about what's near it. Is there a market, a park, a transit station, but we could very easily put in a specific feature, like we want to know how many of these are within 1,000 foot of a rail station. We can do that relatively easily with GIS and those intersection IDs and having all these mapped. So I guess I would recommend that in addition to having these in a chart or in an Excel in a table, you also would want to map them in GIS for those kind of exercises.
Okay. And I mean, has having that, I can imagine having that sort of information, say whether or not it's close to a transit stop, would help maybe start conversations with the transit agency to say, hey, let's look at maybe these locations where we both have a vested interest or we both have some shared ownership of the site and talk about solutions and maybe collaborate on projects. Have you been able to kind of cross-pollinate across other departments and share this information? And has it been useful to others beyond your department, I guess?
Yeah, a good example of that is our transit agency, our county transit agency, which operates the county bus system and rail system. They have an effort to do first and last mile improvements along one of their light rail lines, and a number of those stations are in LA, and they've come to us with some area maps. They're kind of in the early stages, so they've shown us some of their area maps, and they've identified some potential improvements, and they've identified, they've done on their end they've tried to map the crosswalks, for example, and we can easily validate the accuracy of that and provide them with the latest and best information on those features with this tool. So if they're looking at a specific area, we can, again, just as you kind of described with your previous question, we can do a search of proximity to the Blue Line station. In this case, it's the Blue Line, and we could ultimately flag all of those and quickly just send them to that agency for them to cross-check with their list. So yes, I mean, there's definitely some cross-agency utility to these types of inventories with those kind of efforts.
Okay. Some questions here for you, Tim, on a bit outside the inventory process, but a lot of questions for you on your kind of perspectives on the various beacons and treatments that you're using and maybe effectiveness between things. So someone's asking here, are you operating RFBs, rapid flashing beacons, showing better yield rates than some of your activated pedestrian beacons? And are you seeing different experiences with these different countermeasures? And are you maybe moving toward using one more than another? Or can you share any thinking you have currently on that?
Sure. I'll be completely honest. We've done very little in terms of any yield compliance analysis here. We are often very deferential to all the great work that's being done in other places. And although I say that with a caveat, because with the whole RRFB debacle that just recently happened, we were essentially preparing to shift to circular beacons, and we actually were looking at both circular beacons and the blinker sign device, so the signs with the perimeter flashers, and we were planning to evaluate those for yield compliance, because we were essentially shifting away from something we've been using prior, which I should say we actually have more circular beacons than we have RRFBs, which we put in before RRFBs were really on the scene. And so, we were sort of deciding, though, in what direction we were going to go, because it seemed like everything was moving in the RRFB direction. Since then, things have changed and they're back on the table. But I'm still, personally, I think that it's really more about the flash rate than it is about the shape and the size of it. I mean, actually, there's some information from some studies that shows that the circular devices can be more effective with the same flash rate. So I'm hoping that in the future that those become available to us, and the MUTCD looks at other types of device styles, but that the rapid flash rate does appear to be more effective. And that's one of the reasons we're looking at hybrid beacons, is because those look like they may be even more effective. So ultimately, we want to see the best yield compliance we can get, and we're still in the learning process of figuring out what the future is going to look like for us in terms of whether we do more RFBs, do circular beacons, do more rapid flash rates when those become available, or start migrating more into Hawks.
Yeah, and I'll just say, take an opportunity to mention that the guidance, we talked about this already, but the guidance through STEP currently doesn't include that RRFB, the rapid flashing beacon, for the reason that it was going through a bit of a flux period there with the interim approvals. But there is work underway now to fold that in. So look down the road for anyone out there who's been wanting more guidance on the rapid flashing beacon. Stay in touch with us, because as soon as that's available, we'll share it, and we'll probably do a webinar talking about comparing the RRFB with some of these other treatments, and maybe when and where you use the different ones. But I think that what you're saying, Tim, and kind of learning from what other agencies are doing and sharing notes and webinars like this, I think that's a really good way to get up to speed on what the best thing to use is, and kind of what to use and where. I wanted to kick a question back over to our team from Florida. There were, as we saw in Tim's inventory, there were so many different fields, so many different things you can collect about any given treatment, or in your cases, when you were showing us the different types of metrics and data that you collect for the crossing locations, I saw everything from sort of the number of lanes and whether there's a median to the height of the push button, for example. Not something that you might initially think of, but obviously for ADA considerations, very important. And so I remember what you said about taking those fields. I think there are different criteria and the things you can measure, and going out to maybe some end users or doing some more crowdsourcing and saying, okay, which of these are the most important to include? Can you talk a little bit more about that process? Did I get it right? Is that what you did, as you came up with your various things you can collect, and then asked others to maybe sort them and figure out, which ones are really important that we should include in the final tool?
Well, that would be unique to the agency. So no, we use the standards for PROAG, which is the Public Rights of Way Accessibility Guidelines, and the ADA 2010 standards. So all of those things, like the height of the push button, whether or not there's marks, whether or not you have a 4x4 landing pad, what your cross slope is all tied to the standards, design standards for transportation projects that would determine whether or not your project is accessible, fully accessible to disabled users. But when it comes to the community level, that agency, or even if it's like a bike ped group that's looking at the data and wants to know something about the characteristics of their community, they could then use the reporting feature. The agency can use the reporting feature to extract any data point they want to narrow in on or tailor to whatever it is that they're trying to do for their community. As a whole, the data set is in compliance with ADA transition planning, but from a point-to-point basis, analysis can be tailored to whatever that agency would like to do and focus in on and meet other needs of the community and the data that may be important for project planning down the road.
Right. So we have an agency, and there's a lot of platted communities here in Florida, and we have an agency that was very concerned about grates in the openings, or grates in or near the path of travel. And they said, well, could we just use this to make sure that the grading that we have down there is perpendicular to the path of travel and doesn't exceed the half inch, and that we're not going to catch a bicycle wheel or a white cane. And of course, they have that ability to kind of tailor things to the way they want. What we wanted to do was get all of the characteristics that would comply with the standards, and so that's why you see what you see. But certainly, if an agency had things that don't appear in the standard list, FIU could work with them or another agency to get that added, or they may want to abridge it and only work with a couple of features to start with, and that's fine too.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Tim probably the last question we'll be able to get to for the day, and one of the first steps, Tim, in the STEP guidance is really all about collecting data and engaging the public. And that step in particular talks about kind of reviewing plans for proposed projects, or looking at what's in our plans and what are we proposing to do as a kind of a first step toward needing to consider these inventories. And I know you all are doing, you mentioned a lot of the work you're doing in your Vision Zero program. And I'm wondering about the connections between the two. When you think about your Vision Zero projects that you're doing, is this inventory one of the critical inputs for kind of determining, reviewing the lists for priority locations, and then looking to these inventories to help you make decisions? Is that the connection there between your overall planning and kind of the big picture look at improving safety?
Yeah, you could definitely draw a connection between those two efforts. I think, what we've been focusing on corridors, and we have our priority corridors that we're really trying to draw, attention to and focus our resources on. And on those corridors, there's definitely quite a few of these types of locations of uncontrolled crossings. And in fact, well, I'll say two things. First, it definitely allows us to understand what's out there now and what needs to be, potentially looked at for upgrade, and where that coincides with these corridors that we're already focused on. And what we've done is essentially we've prioritized those uncontrolled crossings, marked crossings, to get a suite of improvements, and including flashing beacons on those corridors more rapidly than some of the other places. Additionally, those efforts have really identified the need for us to provide more safe crossings. So, in a city like LA, and I'm sure many other cities out there have similar issues, streets become barriers for communities, and these big arterial roadways are just very difficult to negotiate on these long blocks, and people often don't want to, walk for an extra 10 minutes to get across the street, and really can't blame them for that. And so we try to find those places where people are already wanting to cross, and potentially where there are some problems associated with that. And on these Vision Zero corridors, we've identified a number of new crosswalks, but now we know that it can't just be about slapping down some paint. We have to provide all the features that need to make that a safe crossing. So, and in using our inventory, we're able to build upon what we have already and add to it essentially, and use it in a way to refine the process to expand our universe of safe crossings around the city.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm sad to say that is probably all the time we're going to be able to spend on discussion during today's webinar. I know probably you have questions for our panelists that we weren't able to get to, and hopefully you've been able to have time to jot down some of their contact information here. We've also got our email address on this slide. If you think of something that you want to reach out to us about, whether it's related to STEP or another webinar, some of the content we covered here today, I encourage you to email us, reach out to us, and we'll let you know, we'll answer that question. You can, again, find the archive of this webinar, the slides, and then tomorrow it will be joined by the video recording at that website, pedwecinfo.org/webinars. You'll find this session there and drill down to find that information. I do want to remind everybody that there are going to be some additional webinars coming up to support the STEP program, diving into various components of the STEP guidance, the countermeasures that we're talking about. We talked about a lot of different countermeasures, designs, and treatments today. We're planning some sessions to really dive into details about each of those moving forward. So if you didn't hear the level of detail you wanted to today about, say, the pedestrian hybrid beacon or a road guide or something like that, stay tuned for a future session. We are planning those now. But with all that said, we are looking for information from you all, feedback from you all about what other topics you're really interested in with respect to pedestrian crossings, uncontrolled crossings in particular. And so when you are exiting the webinar today, you're going to be greeted by a very brief survey to just ask you what you thought about the webinar, if you have any other comments, but specifically, we'd really like you to think about, what other topics are you grappling with? What could really help you make better decisions about protecting pedestrians at uncontrolled crossing locations? What questions do you run into on a daily basis when trying to do this work? And that'll really help us make sure that we provide that correct guidance and future sessions that can answer those questions. So please answer that survey. If you have a chance to look out for that email that's going to be coming to you later today. That'll include a link to our webinar archive page, instructions for downloading your certificate of attendance, and other material related to this webinar. All I want to say at the tail end here is thank you so much to Lorraine, Fabian, Carrie, and Tim for your excellent presentations today and sharing your work. And thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar. And I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.